This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Lauren J.A. Baer. After studying English at UCLA and Education at LMU, Lauren taught middle school humanities for over a decade and survived. She's a teaching fellow for the Holocaust Center for Humanity and joins me today on Uncorking a Story to talk about her career and book, Medusa Sisters. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Lauren.
You're so wonderful to be here. I'm really excited to talk about writing and reading and teaching and Medusa, of course.
And Medusa, but we're not going to talk about math. That's one of our rules on this show. Writing and reading, but not arithmetic.
No, I saw a meme that was like, God didn't give me math abilities because I would just be too powerful. And that's where I'm at.
That's right. Well, Lauren, I'm going to ask you the question I ask everybody to begin, which is, where does your story as an author begin?
I, like probably a lot of people who come on your show, was such a voracious and avid reader as a kid. But the idea of being a writer when I grew up, it felt akin to like saying I'm going to be a rock star or I'm going to be, a Hollywood actress. Like it just felt so untouchable. And when I was at UCLA, I think I kind of like ingested this assumption that I was going to be a teacher. Because when you say you're an English major, that's the first response you get is, oh, so you're going to be a teacher. And there's nothing wrong with teaching. I loved teaching. Teaching was some of the hardest work I've ever done. And it definitely made me a better writer, I think. But that was never like my true love, my passion, right? So I taught for a long time. I loved my years teaching. And then one day I'm in the nursery with my middle child. I have 3, my daughter, late at night, feeding her. And so sleep deprived, so overly caffeinated, like basically borderline insane. And I have this thought, Medusa was a Gorgon, but who are the other Gorgons? Like, I've read this material, I've taught this material, and I have no idea. So I pull out my phone and I go right to Wikipedia, as one does. And I find this quote. And this is the quote that kind of changed the trajectory of my career. It was a quote from Jane Ellen Harrison. She's a 19th century classical scholar. And she says, well, the other Gorgons don't matter. They're mere appendages. And, I'm holding my baby girl, thinking about any woman, any human, referred to as an appendage was just like kind of gut-wrenching. And it created this passion project for me of, one, trying to find evidence of who the Gorgons were. And then when I couldn't find anything, writing my own narrative that was more empowering.
So you're just kind of filling in the blanks where there's a white space opportunity, which I think is awesome. And I think, I always say that curiosity is one of, the author's superpowers, right? So curiosity, just having that thought in your head, hey, who were these other Gorgons?
Asking questions and then, so curiosity, and then being observational, right? And writing down what you see, taking notes on the things that you see. Yeah, those are writer superpowers for sure. I agree.
What I'm curious about, though, is your daughter. So it's the middle of the night, you're feeding her, you're overly caffeinated. And for some reason, you think when you're holding this precious life in your arms, you're thinking about Gorgons. So I was wondering, like, was it something about your daughter? Was it a mood you were in? Like you were going to turn her to stone if she woke up one more time? Like what? Because I've been there. I've been there in the middle of the night, with
feeling quite murderous. No, she does have great hair. So maybe that's where it came from. I think it's because I was on maternity leave. And the last unit I had taught before I left my school was ancient Greece and Rome. I was teaching 6th grade humanities, and that's the curriculum, at least over here in Washington State. So I think that's where it came from, is that, these leftover probably anxieties about like, oh, did I do the lesson plans right? And, where are they at right now? Are they keeping up with the schedule I left? Kind of those, anxious teacher moments.
Right. So, I mean, your daughter is like, because that could have gone a couple of different ways, right? Your daughter could be like, "Hey, my mom thinks like I've got snakes in my hair and I turn people to stone," or, "Hey, I inspired my mom's, first novel." Hopefully, she grows up feeling the latter.
Yeah, she's 6 now, which is wild because, this first idea came to me 6 years ago, and then it takes a long time, not only to work on something while you have another job, right? While I was teaching, and then I had these little babies. So that's a process, and I really have a lot of respect for writers who are hustling, who have a primary job and are trying to write on the side, writers who also have children or families they need to care for, and they're writing on the side. Like, it really is a work of like great heart, right? Like love and determination and insanity. Um, and what was funny was that, my husband was super supportive. He's like, okay, why don't you take a year off of teaching and write this book that you're so obsessed with? So we made that decision. I'm going to take a year off teaching. And 2 months into that year, I got pregnant with my third child. And then 2 months later, COVID hit Washington State. So my 2 kids who were in preschool came home. So I wrote most of Medusa's Sisters while I was pregnant and while the kids were at home, and I hand wrote it because I was also being a preschool teacher, right? And I didn't want my kids seeing me on a laptop the whole time. So I would handwrite it. And then at night, once they were asleep, I would type up what I'd gotten through.
Yeah. So tell me just the journey from idea to writing to getting it published. It sounds like, I mean, I know that's a long process, especially for a first book. It always takes longer because you don't really know as much, and you're just the learning curve is so steep. How would you characterize that process for you?
Well, so as I just mentioned, we're talking like 6 years now from like the birth of the idea to where I am now, and the book's been out for like 6 weeks. So yes, I write this book, and it took me probably about 2-ish years to write the book. And the most difficult part of writing Medusa's Sisters was the lack of primary source material. So I dug deep, right? Apollodorus and Ovid and Homer and Hesiod and all the guys. There is information about Medusa, mostly in terms of Perseus's, hero's journey. There is very little about Steno and Euryale. And what I did find of these sisters, they're all from different sources. So once I had all my material and I kind of laid it out, it was like putting a jigsaw puzzle together, but all the pieces are from a different puzzle set, so none of them really go together, which actually gave me a lot of opportunity to be imaginative and create a different narrative. So yes, there's a lot in the story, and I get asked this a lot, like especially like a book club kind of question is what is made up, and what is canon. And so much of like the reason why one sister is mortal and the other 2 aren't, I made that rationale up. Them going to Thebes is made up. The part that's mostly true is that Medusa suffers like a horrific, act of assault in the temple, and then they are transformed. That part's true. Okay, but I'm digressing. I write this book, and then I have no connections. I'm a middle school teacher. So, you Google like, how do I get a book deal? As corny as that is. And I just started writing letters to agents with the first 10 pages. It was like the most traditional way of doing this. I got my agent who's amazing, like the best. And then she kind of took it from there.
So I'm curious, how many query letters did you send out? How many rejections did you get before you got interest?
This one, okay. So I have a confession. I have the manuscript in the desk drawer, that will never see the light of day. I have one of those. It was like this YA story I wrote 5 years before Medusa's sisters. And it had really good intentions, but it was trying too hard. It was trying too many things. And I swear I got rejected like over 100 times on that, right? Like that one was just brutal. So I want to preface with that because Medusa's sisters was so easy. And I want to let any like aspiring writers know that first I had to go through this really terrible experience with my first book. And honestly, Medusa's sisters was me trying one more time. I don't know if I could have done another round of that much rejection. It's really hard. But yeah, Medusa's sisters, I only sent out about 10 letters.
Okay.
Because I was trying to protect my heart. Like I wasn't going to send out to every single person that could. I was being very careful. I was treating this like a baby, with like very fragile little baby.
Right.
And so I got my agent Shane pretty quickly, actually.
So what are the big lessons you learned from that sort of dusty manuscript that, as you say, will never see the light of day? From that process and the 100 rejections you got to, getting this, which obviously 10 query letters for context is nothing. I mean, that is like, that's amazing. So what are the big lessons you learned from your first go around to Medusa Sisters?
You have to keep going. Like, I really think the only difference between like an amateur and a professional writer is that you keep going. That's it. And you really you have to believe in yourself and you have to be slightly crazy.
So, I mean, persistence is there, right? So we talked about curiosity before. Persistence, another superpower, I think, for writers, for authors to get published. But you also had a genre shift. I mean, that was young adult. This is more fantasy. Do you feel like this is a more authentic story coming from you versus a young adult story?
Yeah, I think I thought I had to write young adult because I was a middle school teacher. And so I felt like I wasn't in this adult world. But that's the other thing I would add is like the imposter syndrome. Like you got to watch out for that. Because I had it so badly and in so many different ways, and it wasn't doing me any, any good. You need to love yourself and you need to be your own number one fan, right? Even if it sounds silly. Like I had this quote from the author. I love her, Saba Tahir, who writes all those really amazing YA fantasy. And then she did all the rage, all my rage. That book was so good too. But she had a quote in an interview that was like, if I can do it, you can do it too. And that really empowered me hearing that. So I would pass that on. Like I want to play that forward. You have to believe that you can do it. Yeah, persistence and watch out for imposter syndrome. And now I totally lost my train of thought. I apologize.
Quite all right. But something interesting that you said before is, as an English teacher, as an English major, your goal, you knew you wanted to be a writer, but it was like unattainable. And now you're quoting somebody who says, if I can do it, you can do it. And I think the thing with writing is we all have the ability to do it. Like it's a skill we learn, like when we're really young. We have to learn how to write. We have to learn how to read, most of us anyway. So we all have the building blocks for it, but at some point it's okay getting the confidence to to write something. Of course, it's got to be something, interesting that other people want to read. But I think just the act of starting to do it and, doing it every day is really the first step, I think, to getting something out there. Now, whether or not other people find value in it, that's another story. But you've got to do the reps, like you've got to do the work in order to, eventually call yourself a writer.
Yes, it is hard work. And that's one of those things that when I was teaching full time, I struggled with how do I teach my students to work hard? They're like there's kind of this pressure in teaching today that like everything has to be super fun and like really entertaining and really engaging. And I like that. I want my kids to enjoy my class, but at the same time, there's that part of the tough cop in me that's like, yeah, but life is also about hard work. And sometimes you just have to work hard and like dig deep. Um, like finding misplaced modifiers is not always super fun. You just gotta like get in there and do it. So yeah, writing a novel is gritty work.
So, is there another one in you?
Yes. Okay, so I just finished it. We're in revisions right now. It's Mother of Rome. So it's the story of Rhea Silvia, who's this mythical mother of Romulus and Remus. And what's fun about this story is it's ancient Rome, but it's not Rome yet. And really, it's, this region of Italy that's a lot of kind of like loosely connected tribes, like a confederation of Latin tribes. So it's been pretty fascinating.
Oops, sorry about that.
Grace, it happens. It totally happened. Learning about Latin tribes and then also their pantheon, which is obviously very similar to the Greek one, but also has kind of these like indigenous tribe or indigenous kind of gods and goddesses that already existed in the Latin area. And yeah, I've had a lot of fun there. I like to research.
Does the timeline for writing this one, how different was it from Medusa's sisters?
That is such a good question because it was brutal. It was like a 1 year turnaround, basically. Um, but in the meantime, you're revising and editing Medusa's sisters, um, trying to promote a new book and a new career because I'm nobody, I'm like a middle school teacher in Seattle. So trying to start that and write this book, it was hard work for sure.
Yeah. I know you talked a little bit about the backstory of how Medusa's sisters came to be and a little bit of the process for writing, but what can you share with us about the theme of Medusa's sisters?
I think, one thing I'm trying to reiterate is, of course, this is feminist and it's female centered, but in no way is it meant to be like male bashing. There's a lot of, I tried to make a point of putting really positive um, examples of masculinity in this book, like Erastus of Athens and the way he supports and believes in his wife, Lygia the musician. Um, like he's so fantastic and he's wonderful. I think really what Medusa's sisters is criticizing is systems of power and situations where a minority of people have absolute power over so many and they can act with impunity. Like nothing happens to them, no matter how horrible they act. And so that's the pantheon, that's the gods, but it's also the goddesses. And I don't think that the goddesses, skate through this book without my judgment.
So everyone in power is fair game, regardless of their gender or identity. It sounds.
Yes, in this system, in this this situation, absolutely.
Did you have fun filling in the blanks for Medusa's sisters?
I did. I had so much fun. And what was interesting when I really was, I spent a lot of time in the timeline of ancient myths. The Perseus myth is a very, very early story. And because Perseus ends up being like the great, 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 great grandfather of Hercules, right? So this is very, very early. He's one of the earliest heroes. So when the sisters are in Athens, we're not talking like Pericles' golden age of Athens. There's no Parthenon yet. This is Athens in the early days. So that was kind of interesting to me. And it also changed, like they're very, very old. They're born like even before Zeus takes over on Mount Olympus. So it was fun to fill in like how these sisters could go from birth to Athens. Like realistically, what could they have done in that meantime? And so that's why I put them in Thebes in the very early days of Thebes. And they encounter the Sphinx and they get to have those moments. And then the book doesn't end with Medusa losing her head. It continues because the sisters continue after that. So again, just because of spoilers, I don't want to say too much. But some of those ending chapters were my favorite to write about the sisters and who they are afterwards.
Very cool. Well, I always like to get to know my guests another way, which is by talking about pop culture. So I'm curious, Lauren, when you were growing up, back to your childhood, what were some of your favorite things to watch on TV?
Oh gosh. X-Men, Saturday morning, X-Men, obsessed. I was a big like Rogue and Gambit person. I loved all that stuff. I loved really nerdy stuff. I loved She-Ra. I loved Gem
Oh, Gem and the holograms.
holograms. I was trying to explain this to my daughter the other day. I was like, so there was this girl, Jen, and she had these magic earrings. And when she pressed her earrings, she transformed into like kind of a crime fighting pop star. And she had this boyfriend named Riao. And this other girl group was always trying to get her boyfriend. And my daughter was looking at me like I was speaking Greek. Like she's like, this sounds like the dumbest show I've ever heard of. But she doesn't understand. It was so dope. And this is the thing. I think I would have been like a total sci-fi fantasy kid if not for the way I was taught. Once you get into like middle school, high school, and the books you read start to change. And the way teachers talk about books changes. And all of a sudden, there's this emphasis on like, what is good literature? And good literature can't have a dragon in it, or at least that's what they tell you. And if you want to be serious about reading, you have to abandon those books. I hate that. And I think it took me so long to finally read some of the essays of Ursula Le Guin. She's like my personal idol. And she just bashes how people talk about genre fiction and somehow imply it's like lesser than, when actually like fantasy is the oldest form of literature, right? And she always says there's no bad genres, there's only bad books, which I also really love. So yeah, I think, I like Star Wars. I loved all of it.
I love how you got to that by talking about Gem and the holograms. I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty amazing to me.
I'm kind of a high-low girly. It's like I like Gem, but I like Ursula Le Guin.
Right. What about like fantasy movies? Because I'm such a movie buff. I mean, in addition to being a book buff, but I'm curious, like favorite fantasy movies that would make your, top 3 or top 5 list.
Labyrinth, obviously.
David Bowie, right?
Yes, obviously, David Bowie.
With the baby.
Remind me of the Babe. That's a banger. Never-ending Story. And you know which one I've been thinking about a lot lately? Do you remember Lady Hawk?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe I'll put Lady Hawk in there. But also my dad was a big movie guy. I grew up in Southern California, so kind of right around all the movie studios and stuff. And he liked old movies, like sword and sandal kind of movies. So I grew up watching, Ben-Hur and El Cid and Spartacus and all those movies. So when I'm writing Mother of Rome, I think a lot of that came back. A lot of that love of those kind of epic films.
Yeah. Did you ever see a fantasy movie called Hawk the Slayer? Is that familiar to you at all?
No.
So here's a homework assignment for you tonight. It is my brother and I run this podcast called Celluloid Zeros. I mean, it is a zero. Like, it is a terrible movie, but it is so great at the same time. It's got an aging Jack Palance in it as the bad guy. But man, is this movie just terrible? But I as a fantasy person, you have to watch that one. So put Hawk the Slayer on your if you could find it on your radar screen. Could be on
Okay.
Amazon, I think.
Well,
How about music? What'd you like listening to?
no, I feel like music, I think I have like the most basic answers. It's kind of embarrassing. I mean, you always listen to what your parents listen to when you're growing up, right? So it was like a lot of the Beatles. And like my dad was really into like Buffalo Springfield and that kind of stuff, Eagles. But I did grow up in Long Beach, California. So as I got older, it was really like Sublime kind of music was really big. Snoop Dogg was really big. There was just kind of that like Long Beach pride.
Right.
Like we were really into our music.
Right. No Doubt came out of Long Beach, didn't they?
Yeah, I think maybe between Long Beach and Orange County, kind of like that in between zone. But yeah, No Doubt was huge.
Yeah. The LBC.
Mhm.
Sublime, yeah, I mean, it's a band that was just around for a short period. Well, they were around for a long period of time, but they were well known for a short period of time before.
And I still hear them all the time on the radio. It's wild.
Totally. What are the biggest things you've learned about yourself as a writer? Kind of going through, that first manuscript to Medusa Sisters to, of course, now your next one. What are some big insights you have into yourself?
I don't want to belabor all the work ethic and the persistence because we've talked about that because that's definitely a part of it is you learn how you work and how you work best. But I've also learned where I need to go to find inspiration. And I think that's important, especially when you're having a writer's block kind of day or you're just tired. Because that's real, the exhaustion. And to be honest, I go to poetry. Poetry is like my secret weapon as a writer. I think poets, the way that they are able to describe life with abundance, but also with brevity, like on the line level, is so fascinating and so beautiful. And I think I go to poets when I need help finding surprising but precise language. Does that make sense? Like interesting adjectives and creative ways of talking about things. I get really inspired by poets. I like to take classes with poets. I'm like the kid that does not belong in that class. I'm like the Billy Madison in the class. But I just get so much from them. I am a poet super fan.
I love the Billy Madison reference. I totally get it. But yeah, I mean, with poetry, with anything, right? In any good written work, you can't have a wasted word. You get a little bit more leeway in a 75 to 90,000 word novel. But with poetry, really no word can be wasted.
No, they are so aware as they write about each word earning its space on the page, which I think is really awesome. And then I heard someone describe it like this, and I think this is such a great analogy is like, it's like poets look at the line and they take their teeny tiny screwdriver and then they tighten every word on the line. And I think that's really beautiful. And I think fantasy writers especially have a tendency to get a little long-winded. So it's a good reminder, fantasy books are like the fat books, but it's a reminder to go back and use brevity and clarity.
There you go. And last up, if you could write a letter to your younger self, what, and it starts off with "Dear younger me," what would you tell, the younger Lauren?
These are some hard-hitting questions,
I saved them for the end.
Seriously. Keep going, keep going. Believe in yourself. And also abandon those prejudices that you had about what makes a good novel or a bad novel, and just be more open. Because I do think I wasted time and wasted years. I could have been reading or enjoying different kinds of books, but I felt like I had to read Saul Bellow because I had to like prove myself, but like prove myself to who, you know? So that would be a reminder as well. But I wouldn't take back those 10 years teaching, because teaching makes you a more compassionate person. Like, so much. You learn patience and compassion from being in that classroom. And I think those are good qualities to have as a writer as well.
Very good. Well, Lauren, let us know if there are places where people can go and follow you. I'm thinking website, social media. Can you share any of your handles for anyone who wants to learn more?
Yes, that's so nice. Everything is just Lauren J. Bear. Bear spelled like the animal. I'm most active on Instagram. I have a Twitter. Is it a Twitter or is it an X?
I don't know what it is anymore. I'm lost with that.
I have one of those, although if I have to start paying for it, I might not have one of those anymore. And then I have a TikTok that's, I think, author Lauren J. Bear. And I'm not so good at TikTok. I'm trying.
I think we all are. I haven't cracked that nut yet. My kids certainly have, but I can't dance. I can't sing. I can't throw a book and have it turn into something else. Like I don't have the time.
Once you like have a glass of wine in your mouth and you like pour it in your friends, I don't know. I can't do any of that stuff. I'm not that talented.
Yeah, no. But this has been great. Lauren, thank you for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Of course. And next time hopefully I'll be back when Mother of Rome is finished and we can talk Sword and Sandal.
Sword and Sandal, and since it's Mother of Rome, maybe we'll split a pizza.
Delicious.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.